My brother, Jonathan, believes that his elevation to senior partner is the proudest day of his life. I can picture him now standing in the midst of that glass and steel cathedral known as a law firm in downtown Philadelphia. He's surrounded by predators dressed in $1,000 suits, all of whom are smiling with their fangs and raising flutes of champagne worth more than my weekly grocery bill. A banner hangs behind him, the crisp white letters proclaiming his triumph for everyone to see. Congratulations to your newest senior partner, Janahan Miller. He believes it is the conclusion of everything our family has ever desired, the final affirmation of the Miller brand. He has no notion that it is also the last day of his life as he knows it, and the coffin I constructed specifically for him is already on its way. It's not a real casket for his body. I am not a monster, but I'm a craftsman. I work with my hands, and I've spent the last 6 months putting everything of my expertise, anguish, and cold, calculating hatred into a piece of work that will serve the same purpose. It will be the vessel of death, the end of his reputation, the end of his career, the end of the smug, untouchable world he created on my back. And, like any decent burial, it will be final. But before we go to the funeral, you need to understand the life that was taken. My life. It was not a life Jonathan could ever understand. It did not exist in boardrooms or echo through courtroom gavels. It resided in the calm, dusty atmosphere of a modest workplace in rural Pennsylvania. It smelt like pine, walnut, and cedar, an aroma that seeps into your clothes and under your fingernails, becoming a part of you. My environment was one of humming saws, the careful scrape of a hand plane, and the slow, satisfying transformation of a rough block of wood into something useful and beautiful. Just this morning, or what feels like a lifetime ago, I was putting the finishing touches on Mrs. Peterson's rocking chair. The wood was black walnut, dark and rich, with a swilling grain reminiscent of smoke. My calloused hands, mapped with the tiny scars of my craft, brushed around the surface, feeling for the tiniest flaw. My father taught me that. Wood is a soul. Michael, he'd say, his large hands guiding mine. It has a tale. Your role is to listen to it, not force it into a shape, to make it what it was always meant to be. Mrs. Peterson, a woman with eyes as gentle and wrinkled as a well-worn leather Bible, regarded me from the doorway. She had known me since I was a boy, following my father around this shop. "It's beautiful, Michael," she replied softly. "Exactly like the one my grandfather used to have. You have your father's hands." I gazed down at them, at the sawdust embedded in the grooves of my knuckles. "He taught me everything," I said, smiling naturally and easily. "Said you just have to listen." That was my fortune. It was not in a bank account. It was in the grain of the wood, the quiet joy of a flawless dovetail connection, and a customer's thankful smile. On my workbench, next to a well-worn set of chisels and a half-empty mug of cold coffee, there was the typical mound of overdue invoices. But next to them was a framed portrait that had faded from years of sunlight shining through the workshop window. My father stood towering and stern, carved from the same solid oak he loved to work with. He had one arm around each of his sons. I was at his right, grinning a silly, gap-toothed smile. On his left was a younger Jonathan, already appearing serious and out of place in a little, buttoned-up suit, as if he was only waiting to depart the rustic setting. John and I were two separate species that had developed from the same root. He pursued prestige, but I sought meaning. He built cases and I built furniture. He viewed the world in billable hours, but I saw it in the patient change of the seasons. Our parents, particularly after Dad retired, saw things from Jonathan's perspective. They lived in Philadelphia's suburbs, near to him, and their talks were always filled with stories about his latest accomplishments. A major victory in court. A magazine feature. A bonus that could have repaid my mortgage 3 times over. They loved me, I believe, but admired him. My life of simple, honest work was regarded as a quaint pastime and a failure to launch. "Michael's still playing with wood chips out there in the sticks," Jonathan would say, with an unintentional laugh. That evening, after Miss Peterson had left with her rocking chair, the phone rang, breaking the silence of the workshop. I wiped my hands on my jeans and responded. That was him. "Hey, John, how is the big city treating you?" I inquired, attempting to keep my tired tone from coming over. "Swamped, little brother. Just closed a multi-million-dollar merger." His voice was slick and quick, like that of a man who never slows down. "Are you still making sawdust out there?" It's called woodworking, John. I responded as my grasp on the phone tightened. And yes, I'm still creating products that people actually use. Things that last. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him smirk. Right, listen. The true reason I'm phoning is for Mom. She is ecstatic. Philly magazine published a top 40 under 40 feature, and guess who is on the cover? Let me guess, Pope. He chuckled in a dry, contemptuous tone. That's very humorous. No, that's me. Mom and Dad are framing it. They consider it as upholding their family name, adding some genuine prestige to it. The unspoken words hung in the air between us, you, the type of prestige you'll never have. You should really try to make something of yourself too, Mike, he said, his tone turning to one of pretended worry. For their sake. It would make them glad to see you finally take your life seriously. Before I could react, he hung up, leaving me in the shop's resounding silence. The smell of walnuts lingered in the air, evoking honesty and substance. I looked at the photograph on my desk, which had two boys standing next to their father. He had wanted us both to be strong and honorable. I believed I was living up to that legacy. Despite everything, I believed that Jonathan, in his own way, was. I believed that despite the fancy suit and cynical sneer, he was still my brother. That bloodline and shared history meant something. That belief was the most costly mistake of my life, and it was a debt I was about to repay in full. A few weeks later, the call I'd been dreading arrived. It was Mom. Dad suffered a heart attack. He was gone. The funeral was a swirl of black suits, hushed murmurs, and the overpowering scent of lilies. Jonathan handled everything, of course. He was efficient and composed, accepting condolences with the same measured demeanor he undoubtedly used in court. I just felt hollow. The man who taught me how to read a tree's grain, how to be patient, and how to build something that would survive me was no longer with us. The world seemed unsteady, like a poorly attached chair poised to collapse. The day after we buried him, we found ourselves in a stuffy, wood-paneled office that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. It belonged to the family lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, who had known our father for 30 years. He looked at us through a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles, his countenance stern. "I'm sorry to bring this up at such a difficult time," he said, his voice dry. "Your father had modest tastes in his final years. He left the house and his savings to be shared equally by you both." I felt a tiny, sad feeling of relief. It wasn't a lot, but it was a start, something to keep the workshop going. Jonathan just nodded, his face expressionless, as if he were simply confirming an expected element in a contract. However, Mr. Abernathy added, and the tone of that single word sent shivers down my spine, "There are outstanding debts." He slid a hefty folder over the polished mahogany desk. Significant ones. I opened it, my hands, capable of precisely shaping oak and maple, felt ungainly and strange. Inside, there were no bank statements or official loan documentation. They were markers. IOUs. Records of gambling debts were written on napkins and scraps of paper, all signed in my father's recognizable, looping handwriting. The numbers caused the room to swirl. 50,000 here. There were 75 people present. It all came up to a stunning, inconceivable figure of 250,000 thousanders. The loan was owing to a guy I didn't recognize, a man whose reputation, according to a short search on Jonathan's phone, was founded on backroom deals and smashed kneecaps. My initial thought was one of protective denial. This cannot be my father. The man I knew was disciplined, honorable, and had strict principles. He despised waste. He despised frivolity. Jonathan reacted differently. His face became pale, but not from shock or grief. It was the tight, white-hot pallor of rage. Gambling. He hissed, the word coming out of his mouth like something vile. "Are you kidding me? This is a disgrace." He slammed the folder closed. "If this gets out, my God, my reputation. My advancement to senior partner occurs next month. This will discolor everything. Everything I've worked for." I glanced at him, my shock temporarily forgotten and replaced by great perplexity. "What are you talking about, John? This is Dad's debt. We have to pay it. It's a matter of honor." The words came out naturally. It was the code I had been raised with. A miller repays his obligations. A man's word is his bond. Jonathan turned to face me, and the expression in his eyes was one I had never seen before. It was absolutely terrifyingly cold. He looked at me like I was a stranger, a stupid. "There is no we, Michael," he replied, his tone lowering to a low, frightening calm. "Listen attention to what I'm saying." Mr. Abernathy confirmed it. These are not legal responsibilities owed to the estate. They are intimate and embarrassing secrets. Paying the loan would be a public admission of dirt. I refused to have my name, Miller, dragged through the muck because our father was a senile old fool. The insult against our father struck me like a physical blow. He was no idiot! And it isn't about the law, John, it's about doing the right thing. His name appears on those papers. Our name. You wouldn't understand, he hissed, rising up and smoothing down his suit jacket, a dismissive gesture. Are in your own fantasy world of sawdust and dignity. I live in the real world. A universe in which reputation is cash. I am creating a true legacy here. Something important. I refuse to let this crap imperil it. The official inheritance, including the house and savings, is clean. We take that and we bury it. We let it die with him. He turned and left the office without looking back. He did not simply refuse to help. He criticized me for even thinking about it. He mocked the entire concept of honor that our father, I believed, ingrained in both of us. I felt more alone than I did at the funeral as I watched him disappear down the corridor. My grief over my father was now accompanied by a new, harsher grief, the understanding that my brother was a stranger. I sat for a long time with the damning folder open on the desk in front of me. Mr. Bernathy stared at me with a wary pity. I knew what I needed to do. Jonathan was mistaken. A legacy was not a name on a door or a photograph in a magazine. It was the name that your father gave you. And I would not let the name, Miller, become synonymous with deadbeat. The next few weeks were the most difficult of my life. The sign which my father and I had carved together when I initially joined him in the firm was the first to go. Miller and Sunfine Woodworking. The letters were carved from a single piece of cherry wood, which had been aged by 2 decades of Pennsylvania sun and snow. Taking it down felt like stripping the skin off my own body. Each screw I undid represented an act of submission. I sold the workshop, the site where I took my first steps, where the air itself evoked memories of my father. I sold the tools, saws, lathes, and planers, each of which felt like a bit of my own hands being auctioned. Then I sold the house, the tiny home where I had grown up and intended to retire. I sold my truck. I sold everything. Every dollar from every sale was deposited into a single account until I had enough. I repaid the obligation. I met the mysterious guy in a sterile bank office and transferred the entire $250,000 in dollars. He had chilly eyes and wore a suit that didn't match his enormous body. He counted the money, nodded, and then went without saying anything. There was no ceremony or recognition of the honor I was upholding. There was simply the quiet, awful certainty of an empty bank account. My life as I knew it was over. The foundation I had constructed with my own 2 hands had been demolished to pay for my father's sins, a sacrifice that my brother refused to accept. I obtained a job at a building site on the outskirts of town. The noise was persistent and violent, with screaming saws and shouting men. The work was mindless and physically demanding. Instead of coaxing elegance from a piece of walnut, I hauled rough, splintered 2x4s in concrete sacks. My hands, once the instruments of an artist, turned into rough, blistering shovels. The foreman, a guy named Saul with a bare stomach and a perpetual frown, laughed when he saw my prior career on the application. A woodworker, huh? Well, we have wood here. Pick it up and move it over there. I moved into a cramped, soul-crushing apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin, and the air was constantly moist and smelling like bleach. The warmth of the wood stove in my last store was replaced by the clanking hiss of a radiator, which never completely chased away the chill. At night, I'd lie in the dark, the phantom fragrance of cedar and sawdust filling my mind, and I'd experience a deep despair that seemed like drowning. I had given up everything for my father's honor, a value that my own brother had ridiculed. And all I had to show for it were splinters in my palms and a hollowness in my chest that hurt more than my exhausted muscles. For several months, this was my existence. Wake up, feel the grit of drywall dust in my teeth, go to the job site, destroy my body for 10 hours, return home, eat something cold from a can, and fall asleep dreamless and fatigued. My craft's memories tormented me like a ghost. I had lost both my livelihood and my identity. I was no longer Michael Miller, a woodworker. I was simply another faceless worker, a face in the crowd of the forgotten. The tipping moment occurred on a Tuesday night in late fall. Rain beat on my apartment's solitary window, each drop hitting the glass like a little hammer. I was finally looking through the last few boxes of my father's stuff, which I had managed to preserve from the house. They were largely books about history and antique woodworking manuals. As I lifted a thick, leather-bound volume about colonial furniture, something dropped between the pages and landed on the floor. This was a letter. The envelope was yellowed from age and addressed to my father in Jonathan's clean, assertive handwriting. The postmark was dated 3 months before Dad died. My heart began a sluggish, hard beating against my rib cage. With shaky fingers, I pulled out the single folded paper and started reading. The words on the paper did not just hurt, they eviscerated me. They turned the great sacrifice I had made into a miserable, dumb act. Father, the letter started. We need to discuss your financial condition. I dug as you requested, and it's a disaster. Your debts are considerable. However, I have spoken with my legal staff here at the firm. We analyzed your will and the estate's structure. The good news, for me, at least, is that they are what we term honor debts, which are not legally tied to your possessions. There is no line or official claim against the estate after your death. When the time comes, I'll make sure the official inheritance, the house and savings, is divided and certified clean. We'll let Michael deal with the moral grandstanding. He has always been excellent at romantic gibberish. Let him feel it as his obligation to protect the family name. Allow him to sell his valuable workshop and play the martyr. That's what he does best. I will secure the genuine assets. It's the smarter move. The only play, really. This manner, the money and property remain in the family, with the son who understands how to handle them. Your beloved son, Jonathan, I've read it once. Then again, and a third time. The planet tipped on its axis. The breath surged out of my lungs, leaving behind a frigid, perfect vacuum. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a hasty decision taken out of grief. It was a calculated, deliberate act of betrayal. Jonathan had known. He had known about the debts all along. He had investigated them. He had plans for them. He had arranged my downfall. He did not just refuse to pay the obligation. He had purposefully hidden his knowledge, played stupid in the lawyer's office, and watched me fall into the trap he had laid. He had watched me deconstruct my own life piece by piece, knowing that every nail I withdrew, every board I sold would ensure his clean inheritance. He had used my love for our father and my sense of dignity against me. He had converted my virtue into a financial asset. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not punch the wall. All of the pain, misery, and weary sadness of the previous few months fell inward, concentrating into a single, thick point of crystalline wrath. It was a frighteningly peaceful sensation. A stillness descended over me, the kind of total silence that occurs in the heart of a cyclone. In that instant, I knew 2 things for certain. First, contacting the police or a lawyer was ineffective. This was not a criminal that Jonathan could be charged with. It was a moral betrayal, a deceit so deep and intimate that the law had no words for it. He, as a legal expert, had ensured this. The system he revered would protect him. Justice, in the usual sense, had failed before it ever started. And that's when I noticed the second point. I gazed down at my hands. They were rough and chapped from the building site, but beneath the grime, strength remained. Muscle memory. The entrenched understanding of wood, steel, and pressure. These were no longer the hands of a victim. They were the hands of a craftsman, an artist, a builder, and I just found my next endeavor. Jonathan had based his legacy on paper and lies. I'd create his eulogy out of wood and truth. The despair that had been my constant companion for months vanished like fog in the morning sun, leaving only a cold, clear purpose. The man who had sold his workshop, hauled logs for strangers, and eaten cold beans in a sad, lonely chamber was no longer among us. Someone else had taken his place, someone colder and more focused, someone with terrible patience. The metamorphosis began the following day. I stopped dragging myself to the work site, head down. I went with new enthusiasm. Every bag of concrete I heaved, every wall I framed, was no longer a symbol of my defeat, but rather a form of training. I was strengthening and hardening my body in preparation for the upcoming mission. I accepted every overtime shift Sal offered, saving every penny. The money was no longer used for rent or groceries. It was a war chest. My sleep patterns also changed. Sleep became an unaffordable luxury. My modest flat, which was once a cell of suffering, became my command center. I lacked the resources of a law practice, but I did have a library card and a single, unwavering purpose. I did not study law. I studied art. I studied history. I spent hours huddled over books with photos of the most exquisite, elaborate caskets and sarcophagi ever made. I studied Egyptian pharaohs' tombs, Viking longships burned at sea, sculpted marble sarcophagi of Roman emperors, and beautiful, Gothic coffins of European kings. I wasn't learning a new ability. I was developing the one skill I already had, which Jonathan had derided as playing with wood chips, into a surgically precise weapon. The strategy gradually and methodically took shape. This would not be a physical attack. It would not be a lawsuit. That was his world and game. I'd fight him on my terms. My vengeance would be a masterwork of poetic justice. I recognized Jonathan's weakness. It wasn't about money, really. He had lots of it. His deadly weakness was vanity. He is obsessed with his own reputation. He didn't only want to be successful. He desired to be perceived as such, as a pillar of the community, a guy of integrity and genius. My plan would not target his bank account. It would target his innermost essence. The plan was divided into 4 pieces, much like the robust legs of a well-built table. The creation comes first. I planned to spend every penny I was saving on the best materials available. And with my own 2 hands, I would create the most stunningly exquisite casket ever imagined. It would not be a ghastly horror, but rather a piece of indisputable art. Something so beautifully made that no one who sees it will ever forget it. It would be my Sistine Chapel and Mona Lisa, a monument to the craft that he detested. Second, the evidence. The coffin wouldn't be empty. Inside, snuggled on a bed of the richest black velvet, I would deposit evidence of his deceit. A high-quality copy of the letter he sent to our father. Copies of the bill of sale for both my workshop and home. A verified proof of payment for the $250,000 obligation. Finally, a copy of the estate's final accounting, which revealed that Jonathan Miller, Eskek, had inherited 100% of the clean assets. It would be a stark, unambiguous account of his betrayal. The third component is the message. I would place a modest, exquisite metal plaque in the center of the display, resting on the velvet. I spent weeks thinking about the phrasing. It needed to be perfect. Not angry. Not vengeful. Just a silent and scathing epitaph. I eventually settled on 5 words, polished to a brilliant gleaming. FRA and Hanar Tade is dead. Fourth, the delivery. This was the master stroke. I'd have it delivered to his office on the day of his promotion celebration. He was at the top of his professional career, the pinnacle of the reputation he had traded his brother for. I would transform his moment of ultimate success into a moment of maximum public disgrace. Putting the idea into action required a tightrope walk across a canyon of failure. The first significant challenge was the timber. It needed to be perfect. I chose sapele mahogany, a wood from Africa famed for its rich reddish, brown hue and glossy, interconnecting grain that appears to shift and move in the light. It was exquisite, unusual, and extremely expensive. To afford a single, faultless block large enough for the project, I had to sell the only thing I had left of my father, his old wristwatch. It was a plain steel clock, nothing special, yet he had worn it his entire life. Selling it felt like a final, essential break from the past. Mr. Goldberg, the pawnbroker with sleepy eyes, examined the watch before turning to face me. "This is a fine piece, son," he replied with raspy voice. "Family heirloom." "Something like that," I muttered. He weighed the money in his hand. "Do you need this money for something important?" "A special project." I explained, my voice flat. "This is a commission. For my brother." The untruth tasted like ash in my tongue. He shrugged and slipped the cash across the counter. I couldn't work from my apartment, so I hired a small, forgotten storage locker on the town's industrial edge. It was frigid, had no windows, and smelled of rust and damp concrete. I put up a temporary workshop using only one bare bulb for illumination. I labored through the nights, propelled by black coffee and a righteous rage that never stopped. The construction job fatigued my body, but the labor in the locker at night revitalized my spirit. The feel of the tools in my hands again was like discovering a lost piece of myself. The rasp of the plane, the bite of the chisel, the aroma of sapele wood filling the little space. It all felt familiar, like a liturgy I'd been practicing my entire life. But this time, things were different. There was no delight in creation, only one cold, ruthless purpose. Each cut was perfect. Each joint was immaculate. Every inch of the surface was sanded and polished with compulsive precision. I wasn't just designing a box, I was making an argument. I was crafting a conviction. One night, I was very near to being exposed. It was after 2 a.m. I was working on the detailed carvings along the side panels, which featured a flowing design of ivy and oak leaves, both emblems of memory and power. Suddenly, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. Headlights swept across the corrugated steel door. My heart pounded against my ribcage. The landlord, a nosy old man named Henderson, was on his late or night rounds. I placed a big canvas sheet over the coffin as he began rattling the lock. The door slid wide with a moan, exposing his profile against the glare. "Miller, what the hell are you doing here at this time?" He grumbled, "Just finishing up a piece." I responded, attempting to keep my voice calm as my body blocked his view of the tarp-covered shape. "Large commission, a customized wardrobe. I have a tight deadline." He stared into the murky light, his gaze fixed on the enormous, veiled figure. For a horrifying second, I was convinced he would demand to see it. My thoughts raced, trying to think of a believable justification, but he only grunted. "Whatever. Just don't burn the place down. I see any sparks, then you are out." He slid the door shut, leaving me in the darkness, my body shaking with adrenaline. The close call did not scare me away. It strengthened my resolve. It made me work faster and more efficiently. The world outside of my locker went away. There was simply wood, tools, and one impending deadline: Jonathan's promotion day. After 6 months of arduous labor, it was completed. It stood in the center of the cold locker, a thing of black, horrifying beauty. The sapele wood gleamed under the single lamp, its grain resembling captured fire. The carvings were flawless, with a polish as smooth and deep as still water. It was the best thing I'd ever made, a masterwork created by betrayal, a tribute to a fallen fraternity. I carefully inserted the velvet lining, then organized the documents, each sealed in a protective sleeve. The letter, sales records, bank statements, and in the center is a polished brass plaque. Fr Deg Honor. I fashioned a crude shipping carton around it, securing my Trojan horse for its ultimate journey. I recruited a local delivery service, 2 sturdy kids driving a beat-up truck, and paid them in cash. The instructions were straightforward and detailed. Deliver it to the 45th level of the specified building in Philadelphia. Jonathan Miller was the recipient, and it was scheduled to be delivered between 400 and 4:30 p.m., the pinnacle of his celebration. My final instruction was a small white card that I put to the carton. It had the following contents: "Congratulations on your promotion. A gift to mark the occasion. Request you open it immediately." No one had sent it. There's no return address. It's just a fuse waiting to be lit. I did not go to Philadelphia. I did not need to. I'd built the stage, arranged the props, and written the script. The final act would unfold on its own. Instead, I sat in my tight apartment, phone in hand, and watched the time. 4 o'clock. The party is in full swing. I see it in my thoughts. Clinking glasses, forced laughter, the smell of costly perfume, and ambition. Jonathan is at the heart of it all, a sun king in his own solar system. He's taking handshakes and back pats, his smile wide and real for the first time in his life. Because this victory, this title, is the only thing he's ever genuinely valued. He's narrating a tale, something smart and self-deprecating that is intended to highlight his own brilliance. Everyone is waiting on his every word. He is the master of his universe. 4:15. The elevator doors to the 45th floor glide open. 2 young men in dusty work clothes struggle to move a huge, rough-hewn wooden crate on a dolly into the dazzling marble lobby. A receptionist with a stylish blazer tries to stop them, but they give her the delivery slip. Her eyes widen when she recognizes the name Jonathan Miller. A personalized delivery, a priority. She places the call. In the party area, Jonathan's secretary, Sarah, a timid young woman, whispers into his ear. "Mr. Miller, there is a hefty delivery for you in the lobby. They say it is urgent." Jonathan is annoyed. A delivery. Now, it's an interruption, a fault in his perfect day. "What is it?" "I didn't order anything." "Sir, this is a hefty crate." The message states that it is a gift. It says to open it immediately. Curiosity and a sense of ego got the best of him. A gift. A big one. It must be from a wealthy customer, someone attempting to gain favor. He envisions a large sculpture, an old desk, or something showy to reflect his newfound position. The spectacle of unwrapping it in front of his coworkers may perhaps contribute to the day's success. "Fine," he exclaims with a grand gesture of his hand. "Bring it in. 4:30. The moment of execution. The crate is wheeled to the center of the room. The discussion stops as everyone turns to look at the crude, imposing box. It looks out of place in the lovely setting, like a filthy boot on a silk pillow. Jonathan, as the polite host, takes a crowbar from the delivery men. "Well, let's see what we have here," he says with a theatrical flourish. Several of his coworkers, eager to be a part of the show, assist him in prying the lid up. There is a collective gasp when the rough planks fall away. The mood in the room changes immediately. Silence descends. The rudimentary shell contains neither a sculpture nor a desk. It is a coffin, but it's unlike any coffin you've ever seen. It is not alarming. It is not morbid. It is unquestionably a masterpiece. The sable wood appears to absorb the light from the chandeliers and reflect it as a warm, crimson glow. The delicate carvings of leaves and vines appear to creep across the surface. It is a work of art so profound and absolutely beautiful that the very air in the room appears to stand still in adoration. "My God, Jonathan," one of the senior partners says quietly, moving up to touch the smooth surface. "Who would send you this? It's magnificent." Jonathan's displeasure has faded, replaced by a growing sense of pride. He does not grasp the message, but he recognizes the value. This is an extremely valuable present, a odd, unusual, and extremely costly tribute. He beams, taking in the crowd's astonishment as if he had carved the thing himself. He believes this is a present fit for a king. He takes a step forward, chest puffed out, and raises the heavy lid with a flourish. The last unveiling, the payload. There is no body within. The black velvet lining only provides a deep, dark abyss. The documents are resting on the velvet, prepared like evidence in a courtroom presentation. The letter, sales contracts, the bank records, and in the center, catching the light, is a simple brass plaque. For a few seconds, nothing happens. The throng arches their neck, perplexed. Jonathan looks, his smile frozen on his lips. He does not grasp what he is witnessing. He pulls up the topmost document. It's a photocopy of his own letter. I imagine the scene unfolding in slow motion. The way his eyes move across the first few lines. A tiny furrow on his brow as recognition dawns. His attention goes to the other documents. The workshop sale, the loan repayment. The way blood drains from his face, leaving him with a sickening, gray complexion. Then he looks at the brass plate. He reads all 5 words. Far ein hona or tutai est duid. And he knows. In that one silent, heartbreaking instant, his entire universe crumbles. He knows who sent it. He understands what that implies. He understands that everyone in this room is about to face the truth. Craftsmanship is the signature. Only one person in the world could have created this. He rejected his sibling as a simpleton, a failure. He nonchalantly shattered his brother's life. His carefully crafted facade of civility and achievement breaks into a million pieces. The smug smile has faded, replaced by the slack-jawed horror of a man seeing his own execution. He glances up, and his worst nightmare is coming true. His colleagues, mentors, and senior partners, who recently promoted him, are now moving forward. They are taking up the documents. They're reading them. Whispers spread around the room, beginning as bewildered whispers and progressing to a horrified, indignant hiss. The glances of admiration he had just received are gradually turning into expressions of hatred, disgust, and treachery. They are not simply reading about a money conflict. They're reading the anatomy of a monster, a man who would swindle his own sibling and misuse his father's memory for personal gain. In their world of contracts and trusts, this is the greatest transgression. He hadn't merely breached a moral norm, he had betrayed the sacred trust that underpins their entire profession. His dominion has crumbled. His reputation is radioactive dust. The career he established is a blazing disaster, and the means of his demise were neither a lawsuit or a scandal disclosed to the media. It was a beautiful, quiet wooden box. My phone vibrates precisely at that moment. I've programmed a burner phone to call him at 4 to 5 p.m. I know he will respond. He'll be frantic, puzzled, and looking for an explanation or a lifeline. He struggles for his phone, his hands shaking wildly, almost dropping it. He sees the unfamiliar number and responds. Hello. His voice is a hoarse and broken whisper. I let the silence remain for a beat. Then I speak, my voice is cool and serene as the depths of a deep. Enjoy your party, brother. A pause. I saved you a seat. I hung up the phone. He stands there like a ghost at his own party, phone clutched to his ear, listening to a deadline. He is utterly, thoroughly, and irreversibly destroyed. I didn't even have to be in the room to witness it. The reaction was quick and harsh. I didn't have to read about it in the newspapers. A subtle phone call from Mr. Abernathy a week later informed me. Jonathan was, unsurprisingly, dismissed. The firm couldn't get away from him quickly enough. The story of the coffin, the masterpiece of malice, as one partner dubbed it, had become corporate mythology. But it went beyond that. The partners he had betrayed, guys with long memory and even longer reach, made certain the State Bar Association heard their story. An investigation was begun against his unethical behavior. He was disbarred. He lost everything. The corner office, the six-figure salary, the opulent apartment, and the respect he desired more than air. He was a pariah in the world he had risked everything to rule. He could no longer harm anyone else. His power, which had always been an illusion based on a faulty foundation, was vanished. I didn't feel joyful. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. My wrath had burnt out, leaving behind a strange and empty quiet. The debt was repaid. A certain degree of justice had been delivered. With the rest of my construction savings, I rented a small, rundown workshop on the opposite side of the county. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning. The roof leaked, and the wiring was a fire hazard, but it smelled like ancient wood and new beginnings. I spent my days fixing it up, mending the roof, installing new electricity, and constructing new workbenches. Physical effort felt fantastic, to be honest. I started building again, not for vengeance, but for me. I was aware that I looked different. The easygoing man who had smiled at Mrs. Peterson had left. He was replaced by someone calmer and more determined. There was a coldness in my eyes now, a persistent wariness that had not been previously. The encounter with Jonathan had taken something away from me, a sense of innocence or faith in the universe. And I knew I'd never get it back. One crisp fall afternoon, about a month after I opened the new business, the mailman arrived a hefty, formal-looking package. It came from Mr. Abernathy's office. I assumed it was just some final legal documentation for the estate. I opened it with little consideration. Inside, there was a letter, but it was not from the lawyer. My father wrote in that penmanship. It was wobbly, and his cursive loops were less consistent than I remembered, but it was clearly his. It was accompanied by a large stack of legal documents. My heart began to beat with a slow, heavy pace. I unfurled the letter. My sons, it has begun. If you're reading this, that means I'm gone and the test is over. I pray for your forgiveness for the falsehood I'm about to disclose. There were no gambling debts. The entire thing was a fake, a fabrication concocted with the assistance of my old friend Frank, whom you met as a youngster. The IOUs and pressure were all an act. For the majority of my life, I was an idiot. I pursued money and status, and in my pride, I led you both down the same path. I assessed my success based on the size of my financial account rather than the strength of my character. I saw the same sickness transform Jonathan into a man I barely recognized, a man who prioritized appearance over integrity. And I saw it hurt you, Michael. I observed you striving to live an honest life, and I witnessed how our family's pursuit of a different sort of success made you feel tiny. I failed both of you as a father. I failed to educate you what is genuinely important. So, before leaving this life, I needed to know if you actually understood the lesson I'd learned too lating. Honor is more valuable than any inheritance. Jonathan got a pittance for the inheritance he worked so hard to protect. A test. The bait is in the trap. I paused reading, my hands trembling. I examined the other documents in the packet. They were transfer of title documents, stock certificates, and bank bonds. It was a portfolio, a sizable and confidential collection of investments my father had surreptitiously accumulated over decades. A fortune I didn't know existed, and every single dime was being transferred to me. I returned to the letter, my vision hazy with tears. This, Michael, is your genuine family legacy. Use it to create something genuine, something respectable, something to be proud of. Please forgive me for the agony this test has brought you. I hope one day you will understand. I am and have always been extremely proud of the man you are. The tears finally fell. Not tears of rage or despair, but of relief. For the first time in almost a year, the crushing weight I was carrying suddenly dissipated. It was the weight of a fabricated debt, a brother's treachery, and a father's perceived guilt. In a single moment, it was all gone, replaced by a painful, beautiful, and overwhelming sense of vindication. My father had not been foolish. He'd been a teacher giving one final, terrible lesson. I stood outside my new workshop as the sun fell, sending long shadows across the yard. A new sign hung above the door, which I had just finished carving that morning. It said, Millilar Hunter Woodworking. I grasped a little block of cedar in my palm and ran my thumb over the grain, feeling its strength and tail. They say that revenge is best served cold. However, when the final rays of sunlight kissed my face, I realized that justice is not a dish at all. It is not something you serve. It's something you create with your own hands. You construct it with honesty, sacrifice, and a belief in something greater. I grinned, a genuine smile, the first in a long time. I had lost a brother, but I had discovered my father again. During the process, I rebuilt myself. I turned and walked back inside the shop, drawn to the warm light and the old, comforting fragrance of sawdust, eager to begin making something that would last.